authenticity, humility. Pope Francis is the perfect example of this. He is doing everything right. You see, people will listen to what we say if they like what they see. And as our new Pope, he was very, very symbolic in, his first Mass with people of AIDS, his kissing of the disformed man, his loving the children, this authenticity, this humility, the caring for the poor. This is what the whole world expects us Christians to do. And when they go, oh, that's what a Christian does. In fact, there was a headline here in Orange County, and I loved the headline. I saved it. It said, if you love Pope Francis, you'll love Jesus.
that was the headline?
That was the headline.
Oh.
It was a headline. I saved it. I showed it to a group of priests I was speaking to a while back.
Hello again, ladies and gentlemen. Michael Matt for the Remnant Forum. So Pastor Rick Warren tells us that if you love Pope Francis, you will love Jesus Christ. That's quite a statement from a guy who isn't a Catholic. Rick Warren is an American evangelical Christian pastor and a very popular author. He's also the founder of Saddleback Church, which is an evangelical megachurch in Lake Forest, California. It's also the eighth largest church in the United States. So he's quite an influential man. He was influential in the last presidential election in both Republican and Democratic camps. And now he's telling Raymond Arroyo that the Holy Father is indeed the Pope for everyone, that Pope Francis is, as he says, our Pope. He really loves Pope Francis, as does entertainer and homosexual activist Elton John, really loves the Pope, as does Nancy Pelosi. And Barack Obama, the president, says that we all need to follow the example of Pope Francis. When Time magazine came out with its 100 most influential people in the world, not only did Pope Francis make the list, which of course is understandable, he is the Catholic Pope after all, but Time's write-up for Pope Francis, which is filled with glowing accolades and praise for the successor of St. Peter, was written by none other than the single most pro-abortion president in the history of the United States, President Barack Hussein Obama. In Time magazine's write-up for Pope Francis, the President of the United States says the following of Pope Francis, quote, "Rare is the leader who makes us want to be better people. Pope Francis is such a leader. His holiness has moved us with his message of inclusion, especially for the poor, the marginalized, and the outcast. But it has been his deeds, his bearing, the gestures, at once simple and profound, embracing the sick, ministering to the homeless, washing the feet of young prisoners, that have inspired us all. Pope Francis reminds us in ways that words alone cannot, that no matter our station in life, we are bound by moral obligations to one another. His example challenges us to live out those obligations through work, to alleviate poverty, reduce inequality, and promote peace, to feed the hungry, shelter the homeless, care for the sick, and open new doors of opportunity and visions of possibility for everyone. Pope Francis's message of love and inclusion, his regard for the least of these, distills the essence of Jesus' teachings and is a tonic for a cynical age. May we heed his humble example." End quote. Chris Ferrara, who joins us now from his home in Virginia. Chris, what are we to make of the praise that is being heaped on the Holy Father?
Well, Holy Scripture tells us what to make of it. Woe to you when everyone speaks well of you, for thus did they speak of the false prophets of old. And this has reached absurd proportions now. Is there any enemy of the church who has not heaped praise on Pope Francis at this point? I can't think of anybody. I read the other day that, according to some opinion polls, Pope Francis is now the most popular man in the whole world. Any Catholic who knows anything about salvation history, who has read the Bible, even cursorily, will know that is a very bad sign.
Yeah, John 15:18 comes to mind. But Chris, I don't want to sound like an evangelical fundy or anything here, but I mean, they have been saying for a long time that the one world religion is in the making and that, the Holy Father, the Pope of Rome, would head this thing up. Now, why is it that we begin to see Pope Francis doing and saying things that almost fit what used to be sort of a conspiracy theory that belonged on the Art Bell show or something, we're beginning to see him say things against dogma and dogmatism and rigorism and rules and all of these things that do sort of fulfill the prophecy that the evangelicals have been making for a long time about this one world united Christian church. What do you think? Is it still crazy talk?
Before I say anything about this, being one of those self-absorbed neo-Pelagian Promethean types, one of those Pharisaical legalists the Pope is always denouncing.
Sure.
To the law of the Church, promulgated in 1983 in the Code of Canon Law by Pope John Paul II, Section 212, or rather Canon 212, subsection 3, saying, and I quote, that the faithful have the right, indeed at times the duty, in keeping with their knowledge, competence, and position, to manifest to the sacred pastors their views on matters which concern the good of the Church. They have the right also to make their views known to others of Christ's faithful. That's what we're doing on this show. That's what we have the right to do, and I say in these circumstances, the duty to do. Let me tell you how bad this situation has become. A Jewish commentator in France, Eric Zemmour, he's a conservative commentator, an intellectual, non-Catholic, Jewish. This is what he said about Pope Francis. Francis is the idol of the media, of members of the European Parliament, of the left in the West. He does not seem to mind that the most vengeful and sarcastic critics of the Church applaud him. And then he says this, that Francis is, and I quote, a post-Christian pope, an adherent of a Christianity without dogmas, who was adored by contemporary progressives who have thrown away what is sacred into the dustbins of history.
Yeah.
When a Jewish intellectual, not a Catholic, sees this problem, who in the Church has an excuse for ignoring the situation that confronts us now?
No, that's exactly it. I'm tired of defending the fact that good Catholic journalists are called upon now to make some statements in resistance to what's going on, Chris. I think we turn this all around. I think this neo-Catholic silliness, the apologists for defending the indefensible, they are the ones who should be mounting a defense for how they can continue to defend the indefensible. This is ridiculous. If you go to the Remnant website right now, remnantnewspaper.com, you've got an article up there, Chris, about the Holy Father's latest interview with La Nacion, another sort of leftist radical, newspaper, magazine, in which he says some of the most outstandingly ridiculous and absurd things I think I've ever read from any churchman, let alone a successor of St. Peter, the actual Holy Father, talking about things like divorced and remarried people can be godparents. Why? Because mafiosos the people in the mafia get to be godparents, and so why shouldn't the divorced and remarried? Where is this stuff coming from? How do you defend this anymore?
Well, you can't. I mean, at this point, what can we say? We have a pope who's obviously going to say whatever he feels like saying to whoever he feels like saying it to, which almost invariably is a sympathetic left-wing interviewer, because, of course, he would never subject himself to serious questions by a concerned Catholic, such as, do you favor allowing divorced and remarried Catholics to receive Holy Communion, yes or no? Now, in the La Nacion interview, he made it clear that the answer is yes. He referred to Casper's so-called hypothesis, and he said this wasn't his hypothesis alone. He merely made the first step, because not to make this first step is keeping our heads down, he said. And he got the discussion going. So in other words, he looks at the traditional teaching of the Church for 2,000 years to protect the integrity of the Blessed Sacrament, to prevent bigamists, which is what the 1917 Code of Canon Law called divorced and remarried people, from receiving Holy Communion. He looks at that as something we should really be thinking about getting rid of, and anyone who doesn't go along with Casper's hypothesis is keeping his head down. This is the Vicar of Christ speaking. And in the same interview, he says that he realizes people are really upset by what he's saying and doing, but God has bestowed on me a good dose of unawareness. Vicar of Christ tells a left-wing newspaper that he's pleased with the fact that he's unaware of what's going on. In other words, he doesn't care.
Yeah.
What can one say? This is a situation we have never seen.
Yeah, and the casual, silly throwaway lines when he says at one point in that same interview, I say to myself, Jorge, just be yourself. What is he talking? What is this man talking about? I don't know if perhaps this has something to do with age. I'm not sure, but everyone is just scratching their heads, except for the radical left, like Elton John and Barack Obama, who love this man. I don't know if there's a real plan here, or if this is just stumbling from one faux pas into the next, or what it is. But the idea that we are supposed to somehow defend all of this now is somehow congruent with church teaching and with the traditions of the church. It's absurd. Who can keep track? Who can even keep up with what he's trotting out now?
He says it's good. In the La Nacion interview, it's good. He says that opposition to his program is now out in the open. He says that's a healthy thing. Well, count me in. I'm out in the open. You're out in the open. Many Catholics are out in the open. Even a Jewish intellectual in France is now out in the open. And we're all agreed on the same thing. Something is seriously wrong with this pontificate. You can't deny it any longer. Now, we have somebody like Rick Warren saying, oh, Francis is the Pope of all Christians. Is that the same Rick Warren who gave a prayer at Barack Obama's inauguration? Well, I believe it is. Is that the same Rick Warren who, when Larry King said, me in favor of Proposition 8, banning gay marriage? Never. I had nothing to do with Proposition 8. I'm not against gay marriage activists. So even if he might in principle be opposed to gay marriage, this guy is a pseudo-Christian marshmallow who, when he was on Larry King, immediately yielded to pressure and said, I would never oppose gay marriage. And unfortunately, we have a midterm report from the synod that Francis conceived, convoked, and dominated with progressives, which says exactly what Rick Warren is saying. I'm not really opposed to gay marriage. We have to look for the positive elements in these relationships, alluding to the midterm report, which provide precious support to the partners. That's the document that the Synod Fathers wouldn't swallow. Now, for Synod 2015, it's going to be part of the record for discussion and debate because Francis insisted on it.
Yeah, well, he seems to be meeting the world much more than halfway. He's going much further. But what Pastor Rick Warren is saying, it doesn't sound that different from what we've been hearing from the princes of the church recently. He's basically saying, come on, we've got so much in common. We all believe in Jesus Christ. We think that Jesus was God. We all want to live and be good to our neighbors and so forth. Acting as though doctrines and dogmas such as the Eucharist are just throwaway things that really aren't that big of a deal, and certainly shouldn't be any sort of cause for division. So we really do seem to be boiling Christianity down to the point where everyone can accept it, including Catholics. Yeah, believe in Jesus, be nice to kitty cats, plant trees, and watch out for global warming, and we're all on the same page. But what's so frightening about this is that Pope Francis does seem to be steering people away from doctrine and dogma. And we see that in the preparation for the 2015 now aspect of this synod, where the Pope said, the questionnaire that's being sent out right now instructs bishops' conferences, Chris, to, quote, this is what Pope Francis wants, quote, avoid in their responses a formulation of pastoral care based simply on an application of doctrine in favor of Pope Francis's call to, quote, pastoral activity that is characterized by a culture of encounter and capable of recognizing the Lord's gratuitous work even outside customary models, end quote. This is basically a call to reduce the importance of doctrine and dogma in considering the answers to the questionnaire in favor of a culture of encounter, whatever that means.
First of all, what is going on with this questionnaire? They already sent the questionnaire in preparation for the Synod number 1. Someone, one of the blog sites says this is the recidivist Synod. There's a relapse into the situation before Synod 1. And basically, Francis is just ignoring this synodal process in its first stage, and he's starting it all over again in the second stage with the same controversial propositions that were rejected. Further on in that document, he wants them to facilitate with these questions the necessary realism, a reading from the Italian, in the reflections of individual episcopates, avoiding that their responses would furnish, according to schemes and the usual perspectives, a pastoral, they use pastoral as a noun in English and Italian, a pastoral merely applicative, in other words, that merely applies doctrine. He wants them to avoid a pastoral approach that would merely apply doctrine. Didn't we hear the first time around? The process is out of control.
Yeah.
What he was concerned about this is, at this point, either comatose or not even a member of the church and doesn't care anyway.
No, really, they don't care. They keep on defending that which can't be defended. Now we have the Holy Father in this latest interview saying that he's glad people are resisting his agenda. So I don't know what that does to the neo-Catholics who are whining about the fact that we can't be critical of the Pope. The Pope is now expressing appreciation for those criticisms. But what he's doing with this, where he seems to be looking for answers that he wants, he seems to be trying to address issues that no one's that concerned about. Like, for example, public adulterers receiving the sacraments. There's no hue and cry for that the world over. So I don't know. I get the impression that Pope Francis is forcing an agenda here, Chris, much more than he's acknowledging a problem that needs to be addressed in a pastoral sense. This is ideology.
Oh, it's absolutely ideology. This is the ideology of a Peronist cleric from Argentina who, I have to say it at this point because it's become so obvious, is trying to turn the Universal Church into Buenos Aires. Because in Buenos Aires, he authorized everybody to go out, all of his priests, to the peripheries, and give Holy Communion to everybody. Willy-nilly, 4/5 of these people, when they had relationships, were living out of wedlock. He didn't care. That's what he wants to do now. He's made that abundantly clear. Question 38 in this new list of 46 questions. And they're going to keep asking questions until they get the answers they want. Like a lawyer at a deposition is not getting anywhere. Keep asking the same question. Maybe the witness will give you the answer you want. Question 38. The sacramental pastoral in regard to the divorced and remarried requires a further development, evaluating also the orthodox practice and keeping present the distinction between objective situations of sin and attenuating circumstances. Then the question, and he cites here number 52 of the original synod document, the final document of the first stage, which says nothing about the orthodox practice. The first stage of the synod did not say that we should be evaluating the practice of the schismatic Orthodox who have legalized divorce. He snuck it into question 38. Now he wants all the bishops to think about whether we should be like the Orthodox and allow second and even third marriages. That's not an application of doctrine. That's a change of doctrine. Then he says, in the same question, this is actually what they call a compound question, number 38, what are the perspectives in which what are the prospects for moving ourselves or for movement? What are the possible steps? What suggestions are there to obviate forms of impediment not required or necessary? Meaning forms of impediment presented to the divorced and remarried because they're public adulterers. In the Nacion interview, he said, why can't they be godparents? Really? Why can't a man who abandoned his wife and takes up with a younger woman and is living with her as a concubine in his so-called marital bed, why can't he be a godfather? Is he kidding? I just looked up a couple of dioceses in the United States. One of them is the Diocese of Camden. It says explicitly in the section on who could be a godparent that people who are divorced and remarried cannot be godparents because they are not living according to the teaching of the church. So what Francis is saying is we need to find a way to allow people who are not living according to the teaching of the church to be godparents who represent the church. This is insane.
No, it is, Chris. And the thing is, this is the Pope speaking. This isn't just somebody spitballing over a cigar and a bourbon somewhere. This is the Pope. So when he talks like this, obviously the message going out through the whole world that the Pope is lowering the bar. And I got to go back to the original question we started with. Why is he lowering the bar to this extent? Why does he seem to want to get rid of the rules of the Catholic Church? This isn't pastoral concern because, as we've already talked about, those who chuck the misses and go running off with a young trophy wife and get remarried obviously aren't too concerned about their life or their standing in the church. So they've already tossed the church and gone away. They're not begging to come back in. Pope Francis, for whatever reason, is looking for any opportunity that he can to marginalize traditionalists and take the existing rules of the church on a lot of issues and make them sort of become quite fuzzy and if not disappear altogether. Why is he doing this?
I don't know what his motives are, and frankly at this point I'm sick of trying to figure out what his motives are. I don't care what his motives are. I know what he's saying objectively. I know what the whole world is doing, applauding his every move, his every utterance. And now it is completely out of control. The adoration of the world should signal to us that we have a serious problem with this Pope. And he will not quit. He has been obsessed with this theme of finding a way to let public adulterers receive Holy Communion. He's been obsessed with the idea of some kind of special accommodation of people who have a tendency to commit sodomy. This is unheard of in the history of the church. And on he goes. This recent interview in La Nacion shows that he's not listening to the objections of the faithful. He's just getting worse. In the La Nacion interview, he's basically saying there should be no impediment on the part of the divorced and remarried. He complains that there are several things. I think he says there are 7 things they can't do. They can't read the scriptures. They can't be godparents. They can't be holy Eucharist distributors in the Novosordal Masses. And he says all of this is unreasonable. So basically he's saying people who refuse to live according to the church, who willfully entered into adulterous relationships, should be accommodated. And if they are going to be accommodated, what happens to mortal sin? And if that goes out the window, what happens to the moral edifice of the church? So I would say, and I'm being very frank here because I don't think we have a lot of time to dance around this, what we're seeing here is an attack on the church by the Pope himself. So what do we do about it? We have to stand up and say, no, this is wrong. Whoever says you should just go into your prayer closet and pray is not giving you Catholic teaching. He's giving you a personal opinion. All we're doing is standing up for what the church always taught and what she always practiced in support of what she has always believed.
Yeah, no, that's just it. I mean, we have to stand up, and Pius X, Pius XI, Pius XII, they all called for Catholic action, and Catholic action means doing more than simply saying your prayers, as important as praying is. Chris, there's one more point before we close out here today. I get so tired of our Sedevacantist friends rushing in almost happily when the situation gets out of control like it is right now. They accuse us regularly and routinely of being cowards. We know Pope Francis isn't actually the Pope, but we're afraid of losing subscriptions, so we're not going to tell our people that he's not actually the Pope. You know what? That's not the case, friends, and I think that sort of uncharitable judgmentalism is part of the reason that Sedevacantists 9 out of 10 times are speaking to themselves. The problem is, and it's been this way for a long time, the new Mass is a valid Mass. The Second Vatican Council was a validly convoked council. Pope Francis is the valid Pope. This is the problem. We've been talking about infiltration. We've been talking about diabolical disorientation. That is what we are dealing with. And wouldn't it be easy just to say, Francis, well, he's not the Pope, so who cares? Wouldn't that be the easier way out? We're going into a dark period here in which we're going to have to say our prayers, and we're going to have to be prepared to be scandalized, not by somebody who's outside the church, but by those who are inside the church.
Sedevacantists think they have an easy way out. Well, he's not the Pope. He's attacking the church. He can't be the Pope. No Pope could attack the church. Well, St. Robert Bellarmine says that you could be facing a situation in which just that eventuality would come to pass. Now, does that mean he's not the Pope? No. It means that for whatever reason, perhaps with the best of intentions, although obviously it's a delusion, this Pope thinks he's exercising divine mercy by destroying perennial discipline in the church, which is exactly the opposite of mercy. He himself said in La Nacion, it's a good thing that the opposition is out in the open. Better to have that than stealthy murmuring. I'm on board with that. We're not going to murmur stealthily. We're not going to grumble. We're not going to confine ourselves to prayers, although that's obviously necessary, especially the rosary. We're going to stand up and voice our opposition to this express train, and we're going to try to stop it from arriving at its disastrous destination. This situation is ridiculous. This Pope does not have the good of the church at heart. He has some strange vision he's trying to implement. We have to say no.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, these ultramontanist neo-Catholics, have you ever thought about the fact that, even according to Pope Leo XIII, when he overhears this conversation between the devil and our Lord actually allows the devil, according to the report, to have access to his church. I mean, obviously, this is a human institution, and for whatever reason, God allows his church to be tested. He allows the popes that come in who are elected, not just by the Holy Ghost. In other words, it is a human electoral process that goes on, and terrible things happen, and men get elected to become popes who are not good. And it's not against the Holy Ghost to say, oh my gosh, how did this guy get in? Because the human element is always at work in the church as well as the divine element, and sometimes the human element seems to be a little stronger when our good God allows it to be that way because of the fact that we all come equipped with this thing called free will. And the cardinals of the church and the electoral cardinals of the church have the same thing that everyone else has. They have the free will to make bad decisions. I think we just got stuck with a really, really bad decision in Pope Francis, who again, I think has to rank among the very worst popes in the history of the papacy.
And I would say this, we lay people can only do so much, we can only say so much. We need the voices of the hierarchs to stand up in opposition to this insanity. And that's what it is. It's increasingly insane. These interviews show that we have a veritable process of disease going on at the highest levels in the church. We need the opposition of upper members of the hierarchy, particularly cardinals like Cardinal Burke. But we need more than Cardinal Burke. We need a good half dozen, 10, 12, 15 cardinals to issue a joint statement saying that what Francis obviously wants to do is impossible and can't be done. That would suffice to stop this train wreck before it happens.
No, that's it. And this is not easy. This is a really tough time. Everybody going through this is suffering right now. This is difficult. This is our church, and we have the sense right now that our church has been infiltrated, and that there are problems that are so monumental. The temptation is to get jaded and maybe even discouraged. We can't allow that to happen. We got to continue to pray. We got to recognize that it wasn't easy to be a Catholic living under Alexander VI or one of the notorious Borgia popes either. This is worse than that, but still, people lived through it in the past. They kept the faith, and we have to do the same thing. But the idea that we're enjoying criticizing what's going on with Pope Francis, this is absurd.
Well,
the 7 years of Pope Benedict was a wonderful period where we had some confidence that something in Rome was happening that was good. We just have lost that confidence now.
Well, and that speaks well of your newspaper and your commitment to the papacy as an institution. Because you never thought that Benedict was the next St. Pius X. You know, we had a long paper trail of modernist writings, but you also knew that now we have Benedict as Pope. And the former Cardinal Ratzinger can no longer assert authority over the church. And he's no longer head of the CDF. Now he has the grace of the papal office, and he did some amazingly good things to the church. So we forgot about the prior problems with the former Cardinal Ratzinger, and you put your support behind the Pope. That's what this newspaper is about. That's what the traditionalist movement is about. The institution of the papacy, not a particular personality who occupies it. Stop ignoring the reality of our situation. Call upon the members of the hierarchy to stand up in opposition to this Pope's program. It's that simple.
Sounds good. Good marching orders. Good way to close out the show, Chris. Thanks very much. We'll talk to you next week. And, keep saying your prayers and watch your back.
Everybody pray the rosary for a successful outcome of this synod.
For Chris Ferrara, I'm Michael Matt from St. Paul, Minneapolis, and we'll see you next time.